The doorbell camera caught the sound first, that quiet chime cutting through the still Arizona night. The screen lights up. The timestamp reads 1:47 a.m. on February 1st. A masked figure stands right there at Nancy Guthrie's front door. Just a few seconds later, the camera goes dark. By morning, Nancy was gone. More than 80 days have passed now. There's still a $1 million reward and not a single arrest. But two former FBI experts are now speaking out, and they're saying completely different things about what really happened. One of them just revealed something that's been sitting in those ransom notes since the very first day: Mexico. The FBI knew about it almost immediately, yet they stayed silent for 68 long days. Why would they do that? Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She was the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the beloved co-anchor of NBC's Today Show that so many of us watch every morning. Nancy lived alone in the quiet Catalina Foothills neighborhood north of Tucson, Arizona. It was the kind of place where neighbors still knew each other's names, recognized each other's cars, and noticed right away if someone didn't belong. She had been a widow since 1988, when her husband Charles passed away. For years, she worked at the University of Arizona. Every Sunday, you could find her at church, sitting in the same pew, greeting the same familiar faces. Nancy was independent, active, and full of life, but her body was fragile. She wore a pacemaker to keep her heart beating steady. She liked her simple routines, tending to her home, running small errands, living peacefully on her own after her little terrier had passed away. On the evening of January 31st, her family dropped her off after a nice dinner together. The garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then, at 1:47 a.m., that masked figure appeared on her doorbell camera. Seconds later, the camera was disconnected. There was a trail of blood at the front door and down the driveway. No forced entry, no broken windows. Her medication, her phone, her watch, everything she needed for daily life was still inside the house. Only Nancy was missing. At 2:28 a.m., the monitor that tracked her pacemaker went silent. The device was left behind. Nancy was not. This wasn't some random break-in. It felt planned. Someone knew the house. Someone knew her routine. And someone took an 84-year-old woman who had done nothing wrong except live quietly by herself. Now let's look closer at the scene, because one former FBI forensic specialist saw something the rest of us might have missed. Maureen O'Connell spent her career as part of the FBI's evidence response team. She wasn't the one doing interviews on TV. She was the person who showed up after the yellow tape went up. The one who got down on her knees with brushes, cameras, and special lighting to find what everyone else walked right past. When drone footage from Nancy's property started circulating, Maureen didn't focus on the gate, or the windows, or the flower pots. Her eyes went straight to the driveway, and what she noticed, or rather, what she didn't see, has stayed with her ever since. On that circled driveway in front of the house, she saw only one clear set of tire impressions. In her professional opinion, the vehicle that took Nancy was most likely staged right there in the front circle drive, not in the back as many people first assumed. Why the front? She thinks a neighbor's dog may have played a role. A high-pitched bark carries in a quiet neighborhood. If the dog started barking at the back gate, it could have drawn attention. The plan may have had to change quickly, so the driver pulled the car around to the front circle driveway instead. Pull in, load, drive forward, and disappear. No awkward reversing, no extra time exposed. But here's the problem. That driveway isn't paved with concrete. It's made of decomposed granite, loose, sandy gravel common in desert landscaping. It can hold tire marks well because the weight presses them in, but it's also incredibly fragile. Wind, footsteps, other cars, anything can blur or erase those impressions in just a short time. Maureen was concerned because in the public drone footage, she didn't see any clear sign that investigators had properly documented those tire impressions. No technicians on the ground with scales. No oblique lighting. That low-angle light that makes hidden details pop, like shining a flashlight almost parallel to the floor to reveal footprints in carpet. Maybe they did the work very early, before the cameras arrived. But the window to recover good evidence on decomposed granite closes fast. If that tire impression was lost, the whole chain of identifying the vehicle breaks before it even begins. There are other important pieces too. A black glove was found about 2 miles away in a field near the road. It looked very similar to the one worn by the masked figure on the doorbell camera. It carried DNA from an unknown male. Someone not connected to Nancy. That DNA has been entered into CODIS, and if there's no direct hit, investigators can turn to genetic genealogy, the same tool that has solved so many cold cases through distant relatives. Meanwhile, the FBI's CAST team has likely been mapping every cell phone that was active in the area that night. Who was there, how long they stayed, and where they went afterward. But the biggest lead may have been hiding in plain sight from the very beginning. One of the earliest ransom notes mentioned Sonora, Mexico. Tucson sits only about 70 miles from the border. You can drive to Nogales in under an hour. Once someone crosses that line, everything changes. American search warrants don't apply. Cell tower data becomes nearly impossible to obtain. Gas station cameras in Arizona lose their value. Even the reward money loses power on the other side. The FBI knew about this Mexico reference almost immediately, yet they said nothing publicly for 68 days. Why the silence? There are two possibilities, and both are troubling in their own way. The first is that it was a deliberate strategy. If the kidnappers knew authorities were already looking south of the border, they might move Nancy again, destroy evidence, or change their plans. Sometimes silence is the only real weapon investigators have. Every quiet day could have been a careful move on the chessboard, made without tipping their hand. The second possibility is harder to accept. Maybe the real note got buried under a flood of fake letters, Bitcoin demand, and media noise. What if the most important clue was sitting in a file folder while agents chased shadows for weeks? Experts are now calling for the DEA to get involved. That agency has deep intelligence, networks that cross the border, informants and surveillance that reach into Sonora. But so far, there's been no public word that they've joined the search. Pressure is building here at home, too. The Pima County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to demand answers from Sheriff Chris Nanos, giving him just 10 business days to respond. Reports say the lead detective assigned to Nancy's case had never investigated a homicide before. 80 days in, with the FBI involved from day one, and the main investigator was new to murder cases. We also now know the house was watched at least 3 separate times in January before the abduction. Someone sat outside Nancy's home on 3 different occasions, watching, learning her routine, waiting for the right moment. That doesn't sound like a desperate, impulsive crime. That sounds like patience and planning. Some things were left behind on purpose, it seems. Nancy's medications were still there, the ones she needed every day to stay alive. Her pacemaker monitor stopped transmitting at 2:28 a.m. That timestamp feels important, yet it hasn't been fully explained publicly. There was no forced entry. Did she open the door herself, or did someone already know how to get in? After that first professional-sounding note that mentioned Mexico, the real sender seemed to disappear. Most of the later messages appear to be from opportunists looking to make money. The FBI has reportedly separated the real communications from the noise. True professionals often speak once, point to something real, and then go quiet. Only amateurs keep talking. Now we come to 2 very different theories from people who know this kind of work intimately. Jennifer Coffindaffer, a former FBI special agent, believes it's straightforward. She applies Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the right one. This was a kidnapping for ransom. Sadly, she thinks Nancy likely died early on. The kidnappers tormented them. Family with conflicting notes. One saying she was alive in Sonora, another saying she was dead. Knowing the FBI would never advise paying without proof of life, she once described it as possibly an inside job because the person knew exactly where the camera was and went straight for it. But at its core, she still believes the motive was money. On the other side, Dr. Ann Burgess, a psychiatric researcher who worked directly with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and helped profile some of America's most notorious serial killers, sees it differently. She believes this may have been retribution, not against Nancy, but against her daughter, Savannah. Savannah is one of the most recognized journalists in the country. She has covered trials that sent people to prison. She has asked hard questions powerful people didn't want answered. She has confronted public figures on national television. If someone wanted to hurt Savannah as deeply as possible, they wouldn't go after her directly. They would go after the one person she could never fully protect. Her 84-year-old mother living alone, 2,000 miles away, with no security and no dog to bark a warning. Dr. Burgess called it a very mean, angry, horrible thing to do. She added that if this theory is correct, the perpetrator likely won't strike again. This wasn't the work of a serial offender. It was personal, something that carried meaning only for that one individual. And after all this time, why hasn't anyone come forward despite the $1 million reward? Retired Pima County Homicide Detective Kurt Grabb believes there were 2 to 4 accomplices. The planning, the surveillance, the coordinated execution. One person alone couldn't have pulled it off and covered their tracks so well. True crime analyst Josh Diaz put it plainly. They can't come forward without incriminating themselves. Whoever is involved is ride or die together now. But Maureen O'Connell sees it another way. She says money almost always breaks silence in cases like this. $1 million usually gets someone talking, she noted. Yet this time, the silence has held. All these threads are still twisting together, the tire impression that may or may not have been preserved in the granite. The Mexico lead that was known from day one, the DNA on that glove still waiting in the system. Savannah continuing to show up on television each morning, not because the pain has gone away, but because she refuses to let her mother's name fade. Nancy is 84 years old. She left without her medication. Somewhere, someone is carrying this heavy secret. And secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, eventually need a place to breathe. If you live near the Catalina foothills, if you noticed a vehicle that seemed out of place in January, if someone in your life became quieter, more nervous, or unusually careful after February 1st, that small detail might matter more than you think. You don't have to be certain, you just have to call. The number is 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can stay anonymous, no identification is required. That $1 million reward is still waiting for the right information. Nancy is still missing, but her story is not over. We're going to keep following every lead. If you've watched this far, thank you. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates. Leave a comment below. Which theory feels more likely to you? A ransom kidnapping? Or something more personal and vengeful aimed at her daughter? Share this with one person who might care. Nancy's name stays alive, only if we refuse to look away. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. To everyone in the Notebook 5E community who keeps these stories going, you are the reason we still talk about Nancy. We'll be back with the next update, because this case is far from finished.